In the year 1100, this was the largest city in North America. Larger than London. Rivaling Paris. By 1350, it was empty, and the people who built it never wrote down why. Forget what you think you know about pre-Columbian America. Forget the idea that great cities only rose in Mexico and the Andes. 6 miles east of where the Mississippi meets the Missouri, on a floodplain in what is now Illinois, a civilization built something Europe could not have imagined. They called it nothing. We call it Cahokia, after a much later tribe that lived nearby. The original name is lost. At its peak around 1100 CE, as many as 20,000 people lived inside its bounds. Wattle and daub houses stretched in planned rows. A central plaza covered 50 acres, larger than 30 football fields. And rising from the heart of it, a flat-topped earth pyramid 100 feet tall, with a base wider than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was the largest earthwork ever built in the Americas north of Mexico. And almost no one outside archaeology has ever heard of it. Cahokia did not grow slowly. It exploded. For centuries before, the people of the American bottom lived in small villages, a few dozen huts, scattered along the rivers, growing maize and squash. Then, around the year 1050, something changed. Archaeologists call it the Big Bang. Within a single generation, a village of perhaps 1,000 people became a city of 15,000. The old houses were torn down. The land was leveled. And a new plan rose in their place, a planned city, laid out on a precise grid aligned 5 degrees east of true north. Streets. Plazas. Mound clusters. All according to a single design. Why? We do not know. Historians believe a charismatic leader, or a religious movement, or perhaps a celestial event, possibly the supernova of 1054, visible for weeks in daylight, drew people in from hundreds of miles away. Whoever they were, they came. Pottery styles from distant regions appear at Cahokia in the same archaeological layer. Languages from the plains, the Gulf, and the Great Lakes converged on this single floodplain. It was an ancient American melting pot, and the city it built had no precedent on the continent. But what makes a city is not its size. It's what happens inside. Imagine standing in the Grand Plaza on a summer afternoon in 1100. The air smells of wood smoke, river mud, and roasting venison. Behind you, Monk's Mound rises like a stepped mountain, its summit crowned with a great cedar post temple painted blood red. Ahead, a crowd of thousands has gathered. They have come to watch Chunky. A player rolls a polished stone disc across the plaza. 2 athletes sprint after it, hurling long spears at where they think it will stop. The crowd roars. Bets are placed in marine shells, copper, and tobacco. Chunky was more than a sport, it was a continental obsession. Game stones from Cahokia have been found from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes. Beyond the plaza, the Cahokians were master engineers. They built a wooden sun calendar, a circle of 48 tall cedar posts, archaeologists named it Woodhenge, that marked the equinoxes and solstices with Stone Age precision. They imported copper from Lake Superior. Mica from the Appalachians. Conch shells from the Gulf of Mexico, 1,000 miles away. They wore feathered cloaks, copper ear spools, and tattoos of falcon warriors, a religious symbol of the divine sky. Cahokia was not a tribe. It was a civilization. And like every civilization, it had a darker side. In 1967, archaeologists began excavating a low ridgetop mound on the southern edge of the city. They called it Mound 72. What they found inside changed everything. At the center of the mound lay a high-status pair, one male and one female, placed side by side on a bed of more than 20,000 polished marine shell beads, carefully arranged in the shape of a falcon with outstretched wings. Around them, more than 250 other burials. Some were retainers, attendants buried with the elite couple. But others tell a more disturbing story. In one pit, 53 young women, all between 15 and 25 years old, were laid out in neat parallel rows. Evidence suggests they were sacrificed. In another, dozens of men appear to have been clubbed and thrown in. This was not a battlefield. This was state ritual. What does it mean? Historians still argue. Some see a theatrical display of elite power. Others see religious sacrifice tied to fertility, the Falcon, the renewal of the cosmos. What's certain is this: by 1100, Cahokia had developed something other North American societies had not. A class system. A priest-king ideology. The capacity for organized violence on a scale that required a hierarchy to coordinate it. The Cahokians had built a city. They had also built an empire of meaning around it. And empires of meaning are the most fragile of all. Around the year 1175, the Cahokians did something they had never done before. They built a wall. 20,000 logs. 2 miles long. A timber palisade with bastions every 70 feet, encircling the central mounds and plazas like a fortress. They burned it down, rebuilt it, burned it down again, 4 times in a century. You don't build a wall like that unless you are afraid. Of whom? We don't know. There is no clear archaeological signature of a foreign invader. The threat appears to have come from inside, from neighboring Mississippian groups, perhaps. From factions of Cahokians themselves. Then the weather turned. Tree-ring data and Mississippi sediment cores tell the same story. Beginning around 1150, the climate cooled and dried across the Midwest. Droughts grew longer. Then, in cruel rhythm, the Mississippi began to flood. Catastrophic flood struck the floodplain at least 3 times between 1150 and 1250, drowning the bottomland fields the city depended on. For years, the older theory blamed the Cahokians themselves: deforestation, soil exhaustion, an ecocide of their own making. But recent geoarchaeology has rejected that story. The stratigraphic record shows no sign of catastrophic erosion from clearcutting. The collapse was not the Cahokians' fault. It was the climate. It was the flood. And it was the city tearing itself apart from within. By 1200, the population was falling. By 1275, it was a fraction of its peak. People packed up. Walked away. The mounds went silent. By 1350, Cahokia was empty. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Abandoned. The Cahokians dispersed, south, west, east, carrying their pottery, their stories, their gods with them. They became the ancestors, archaeologists believe, of many later Mississippian peoples. The Osage. The Quapaw. The Dajiha-speaking nations preserve oral traditions that may echo the great city, though we cannot draw a straight line. For 140 years, the mounds stood alone. The forest crept back. Vines climbed the temples. The Grand Plaza became a meadow. When Spanish explorers under Hernando de Soto crossed the Mississippi in 1541, they passed within a few days' march of the site. They saw mounds. They wrote nothing about a city. Because there was no city left to see. 2 centuries later, American settlers arriving in Illinois would gaze up at Monk's Mound and refuse to believe Native Americans had built it. They invented theories: lost Israelites, vanished giants, Welsh princes. Anyone but the people who had actually been there. The Cahokians had built the largest city north of Mexico. And then history, written by others, erased them. Cahokia is a warning carved in earth. A city of 20,000. A planned grid. A trade network spanning a continent. A religious ideology. An army. A wall. All built without the wheel, without metal weapons, without writing. And all gone within 3 centuries. Civilizations do not need to be conquered to fall. They can be drowned by their own rivers. They can be hollowed out by their own fears. They can simply be left behind. If this changed how you see ancient America, subscribe. Untold Ages reconstructs a lost world every week.